If you want to get in shape, like maybe don't eat more than you burn. But don't eat more than you burn as a general statement. It was like, do whatever you want. It's your life. I just have the issue when people want something different than the way they act. Anything that is not the work distracts you from the work. Well, I eliminate it by eliminating it. And that sounds ridiculous, but like I think the vast majority of productivity hacks can get boiled down to remove everything that isn't work. And so it's like when you eliminate everything else, and then I just set a kitchen timer for how long I expect a task to last. That is when I'm like peak productivity per unit of time, because there's nothing else to do. I think there's like kind of like micro macro. So like from a micro perspective, if you work for 60 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever, and then you're like, okay, I need a break. If you take the 5 or 10 minute like walk around the building or walk outside, to me, that's where you can get your natural light and all of that stuff. But then you come back and then you're fresh again and then you hit it. I see that rest as productive because it increases the overall net production over a larger period of time. So if you work like that for 12 hours and you worked without doing that, maybe you can only work 8 hours, or you can work the same 12, but you don't get as much done. So for me, it's really just the net productivity of a human being is what they get done over a period of time. So productivity has a temporal component to it and an output component. So maximizing output per unit of time is productivity as I define it. And so it is, okay, anything that increases that rate of work, which for the most part is just deleting the things that aren't work. I think people don't do very much. I think people do a lot of talking about doing, not a lot of doing. And I think it's the doing that does everything. And I think and whether it's lack of motivation, lack of focus, lack of 100 different things, it just comes down to number of actions taken per unit of time. And I think the vast majority of people just wildly underestimate the volume that's required. People think that someone else is doing 2 times or 3 times as much, but it's more often that they've done 1,000 times or like 10,000 times the amount of work. A huge amount of the delay that happens when people are starting out is the amount of time it takes for them to realize there is no easy way. So they spend a huge amount of time, they figure out how to do it, and then they spend a really long time trying to figure out if there's an easier way, and then they give up trying to find an easier way, and then they just start the hard way, because the hard way is the only way. What's really tough about human behavior is that punishment fades, but reward sticks. Meaning, like when you go out and drink, if you drink too much, the next morning you're hungover and you're like, I'm never going to drink again. But then a week later, you're like, you remember the reward, but you don't remember the punishment, right? And it's the same reason that people go back to ex-boyfriends and ex-girlfriends. It's like they remember the good times, but they forget about the bad times. So punishment fades, but reward sticks. And so the hardest behaviors to change are ones that have rewarded you in the past, because you will tend to remember the reward and want to repeat them. And so the only way to really beat those is to find something to do instead that rewards you better. When you quit the job and you start entrepreneurship, you get rewarded really big for taking a risk, for doing something different. But you don't need to take those kind of existential risks all the time. And the problem is that you get a massive reward for doing so in the beginning, and then you almost have to immediately unlearn that and then stick with this current path for an extended period of time. But you kind of always remember the hit of trying something new, which is why I think so many entrepreneurs tend to always want to do lots of new things, when most of the time they need to just get better at the thing that's in front of them and confront whatever problem they don't know how to solve so that they can get that thing to the next level. And so they think that by doing something new, because that's what worked for them in the past, that's going to get them to the next level, when in reality, they just end up distracting themselves and trying to chase 2 or 3 masters at a time and never getting there. That manifestation is bullshit, and action is the only thing that matters. Mindset plus no action, no outcome. Mindset plus action, outcome. No mindset, action, outcome. So if someone tries 100 times versus 10 times, I would say the fact that they took more action is the reason they got to where they're trying to go. Now, when we try to get to like, why did they do that? I don't think anyone has the answer to that. I think the reason that people get really up in arms about it is because these are dogmas, right? These are belief systems which people operate at their very core, which really just means ways of being, which means ways of behaving, and ways of talking is included in that in terms of behavior. But people have a very hard time defining what the hell they're talking about when we ask some of these words that are amorphous. And so I have, by and large, just removed them from my vocabulary so that I can describe the observable. And it has been probably the single most productive thing that I have done in my career. And so is it a small hill? It is probably the only hill and the main hill that I will die on, which is that behavior rules everything. And you have a history of past, reinforcers or punishers for a set of behaviors, and you repeat them in the future. And that's the only thing that I will say about why someone does something. Focusing exclusively on behaviors and unbundling terms that are amorphous has been, I think, the key to my ability to communicate to people, train staff, and kind of enlist people to where we're trying to go. I don't think it serves people. And that's why, I just don't like. Now some people are like, I mean, yes, you feel great about it. I'm glad that if you had the option between making 100 phone calls and sitting there and manifesting, you will get further making 100 phone calls. And so I'm trying to decrease the amount of time it takes people to just do the thing. In the beginning, we have to start defining terms of like, what's the meta concept that I kind of operate off of? And the biggest one is fundamentally that, like, what is learning, right? Like, what is learning? So it's same condition, new behavior. That's fundamental. Like from a behavioral science perspective, it's like if you're, person is condition A, and then we teach them something, when they re-enter condition A, they change their behavior. So it's observable. So same condition, new behavior. If the phone rings and you say XYZ, and then I say, hey, don't say XYZ, say ZYW. The phone rings again, you say XYZ, you haven't learned. If you say ZYW, you have learned. Like a lot of words would be like, so what's an excuse? So like an excuse is a statement to avoid punishment, which is very simple. It's like, okay, it's a statement that like someone says something like, what's an excuse? Like, show me when an excuse has occurred. And by looking at like, patience, I've defined this plenty of times because I had to use it all the time, which is figuring out what to do in the meantime. So if you say to a young kid, be patient, they don't know what that means. It's a bundled term. It means nothing. Be patient. It means nothing. So how would I give some directions on how to be patient? Figure out something else to do. That's all you have to do. We are all being patient right now for our S&P 500 accounts. It's defining them within the observable universe. These are the things that we see. When someone has exhibited resiliency, it means that they've returned to a baseline of behavior. And how resilient they are depends on how quickly they do that. If someone's not very resilient, it means that they extend the change in behavior for a long period of time. If they're permanently, quote, traumatized, it means they never change their behavior, right? So it's like, what's trauma, right? Trauma is a permanent change of behavior based on an aversive stimulus, a negative stimulus, right? But then the question is, okay, if we have this trauma, right? And then people are like, I store trauma in my spine. It's like, what? Where is there a hard drive in your, like what cell is this being? People just say things. And so it's a permanent change of behavior from something bad happening. Okay, now if you're a little baby and you touch a stove and it burns your hand, and that's an aversive stimulus, and you change your behavior, you don't touch hot stoves again, was trauma bad? I think fundamentally, like, good communicators are able to transfer ideas efficiently because they use language that everyone understands, and ideally things that everyone can observe with their own two eyes. No one's specific with their language, and so no one knows what anyone's talking about. And I think the vast majority of people don't communicate well with one another because both people are saying words that neither person understands, and no one's defined anything. This has been a huge area of interest for me in defining reality. And I think that, honestly, it's helped me navigate reality really well and make higher quality decisions. There are many things that I've wanted to be different about myself for a very long period of time. And I would say I want to be more authentic. And I'm like, well, what's authenticity? How do I be more authentic? What do I do? Well, it's like, okay, well, authenticity is how you behave when there's no risk of punishment. And so if there's no risk of punishment, how you behave, basically, if you're alone and no one can find out about what you do, that's you authentically. Now, the problem is that in society, we also have rules that govern other people's behavior, right? Which means that the only truly authentic person is someone who behaves the exact same way alone as they do in public. Anyone else who has any inclinations to do anything that's outside of society's preferences or the rules that govern how we interact with each other or the laws, right, has to, by their very definition, not be authentic or be less than 100% authentic. And I see many of these traits as not binaries, are you authentic or not authentic, but how authentic are you? And also in this setting. And if it's like, man, this sounds like it's a little bit more complex, it's like, yeah, welcome to reality. Well, it's also the question of, is being 100% authentic something that is I should be? What it does is it adds nuance. But B.F. Skinner, who's a famous behavioral scientist, said, if many variables exist, many variables must be studied. And so a lot of people want a very neat box with clean lines and say, like, this is the way it is. And I don't think reality is that way. Like, it's not, is this person honest or dishonest? It's how honest are they? How loyal are they? I think it's more, if you want these things, these are the recipes for achieving them. So if you want to be perceived as patient, figure out things to do in the meantime. If you want to be perceived as authentic, behave more in a way that you do in private and public. If you want to be perceived as more courageous, then decrease the time between when you perceive something as risky and when you take action on it. Like, all of a sudden it's like, oh, so I want these traits. And so this would, in my opinion, be the first way that, at least the first place I've seen where there's like a recipe, like, do this. How would you explain it to a child who doesn't know what the words mean? And I think that's what allows, it's what has allowed me to exhibit more traits that I wanted to have versus traits that I didn't want to have. And until I had that, I just was like, why do people describe me this way? And it's because I couldn't break down what I had to change about what I did to change basically reality. So I think we repeat things that have served us in the past. And so I think one of the reasons that people misunderstand why they do things is because people ask the question, what triggered that? You ever heard that? It's like, oh, something triggered this behavior. But it's not about what happened before. It's about what happened after, the last time you did it. It comes down to what are the things that we want to change, and then how do we change them? And ideally, we want to have some sort of reward cycle as fast as possible with that new behavior.